This is a story about a farmer who dug a hole after a storm, and what he found buried underneath left him speechless. It is a quiet story, one that begins not with a shout, but with the sound of water settling into soil, a narrative rooted in the vast, horizontal silence of the Kansas plains. In the late spring of 1964, a supercell thunderstorm, a meteorological event of unusual violence, tore across Saline County. It moved with the force of a physical entity, its passage marked by bruised violet clouds, hailstones the size of small stones, and a scouring wind that flattened entire fields of sorghum, leaving the land looking as though it had been scraped clean by a colossal, indifferent hand. When the storm passed, it left behind an atmosphere of preternatural calm, the air thick with the smells of ozone, wet earth, and crushed vegetation. For the men and women who lived there, whose lives were measured by the slow turn of the seasons and the resistance of the soil, such storms were a known and respected adversary. They were events to be endured, their aftermath a matter of methodical repair and patient resignation. A local man, a farmer whose family had worked the same section of land for 3 generations, emerged from his storm cellar into this cleansed, broken world and began the slow, familiar process of assessing the damage to his property and his livelihood. The devastation was extensive but not entirely unfamiliar. Fences were down, a small barn had lost a section of its roof, and the sorghum field nearest his home was a flattened ruin, the stalks bent and broken. Yet as he walked the perimeter, his boots sinking into the soft, waterlogged earth, his gaze was drawn to something that did not belong to the familiar grammar of storm damage. In the center of the ruined field, the ground had not merely been flooded or scoured, it had subsided. The water had pooled there, creating a dark, reflective surface that mirrored the now placid sky above, an unsettling stillness in the midst of chaos. This was no ordinary erosion gully, no simple washout carved by the torrent of rain. The depression was too regular, its edges too defined, forming a near-perfect rectangle about 20 feet long and 10 feet wide. It was a geometric wound in the land, a sunken scar that spoke of a hidden structure, a void beneath the surface that had finally given way under the immense weight of the storm's deluge. This unbelievable discovery was not a product of nature's random violence, but a symptom of a carefully hidden, man-made order that had been forced to reveal itself. The land itself seemed to have surrendered a long-held secret under duress. The farmer was a man of immense patience, a quality cultivated by decades of watching the sky and waiting for the soil to yield. He was not prone to flights of fancy or easy alarm. But this geometric precision, this unnatural subsidence disturbed him on a fundamental level. It was a discordant note in the vast, quiet symphony of his world, a disruption not just of his field, but of the very logic of the land he thought he knew so intimately. The silence that followed the storm now seemed different, heavier, as if it were guarding this new, unwelcome anomaly from view. He stood there for a long time as the sun began to break through the clouds, its light glinting off the pooled water in the rectangular depression. The land around him was a testament to the chaotic power of nature, a landscape of random destruction. But the sunken scar was the opposite. It was a testament to a hidden, deliberate geometry, an underground secret that had been disturbed from its long slumber. It was the kind of creepy story that began quietly, in a place where no one was watching, a story that would not stay buried forever. The mystery was too profound to ignore, a question posed directly by the earth beneath his feet. It demanded more than just observation, it demanded an answer. The need to understand the source of this disturbance, to restore the known order of his land, outweighed any fear or hesitation. He turned and walked back toward his barn. The image of that perfect sunken rectangle burned into his mind. He was not an adventurer or a treasure hunter. He was a farmer, and his land was broken. The only way to fix it was to understand why. He returned not with a tractor or heavy machinery, but with a single well-worn shovel, its wooden handle smoothed by years of use. The simple tool felt appropriate for the task at hand, a quiet, methodical dialogue with the soil. As he approached the edge of the sunken scar, the air was still and heavy. The only sound the distant call of a meadowlark and the soft squelch of his boots in the mud. He was about to break the surface, to disturb a silence that had been kept for decades, and he did so with the sober purpose of a man simply trying to understand his world. This initial act, this simple decision to dig, would set in motion a chain of events that would ripple through archives and institutions for decades to come. It was the beginning of a hidden story, one that the land itself had been forced to tell. What lay beneath that disturbed soil was more than just a forgotten object. It was a piece of a history that had been deliberately and meticulously erased. If this mystery has already captured your attention, subscribe so you don't miss the shocking truths we are about to uncover. The work was slow and arduous, the shovel slicing into the thick, clay-rich soil with a wet, satisfying sound. Each spadeful of earth he removed seemed to deepen the silence around him, as if he were digging his way into a pocket of forgotten time. The water in the depression slowly drained away as he worked, revealing the dark, muddy floor of the sunken rectangle. He dug with a steady, practiced rhythm, his movements economical and precise. He was not searching for anything in particular. He was simply excavating a problem, trying to find the foundation of the anomaly that had scarred his land. After nearly an hour of labor, when he had dug a trench about 3 feet deep, the shovel struck something that was not earth or stone. The impact sent a dull, metallic clang back up the handle, a sound that vibrated through his hands and arms. It was a dead, solid sound, the sound of a large, immovable object resisting him. He paused, his breath misting in the cool morning air, and stared down into the hole. The sound was utterly alien to this place. It did not belong to the language of rock, root, or buried farm equipment he knew so well. This was something else entirely. Carefully, he began to scrape away the mud around the point of impact. The dark soil gave way to reveal a flat, smooth surface of olive-drab steel, its painted finish pitted and scarred by decades of contact with the damp earth, but fundamentally intact. The surface was cold to the touch, unnaturally so, as if it held a deep subterranean chill that the morning sun could not warm. It was not a pipe, nor a tank, nor any other piece of agricultural infrastructure he could identify. It was a solid, unyielding plane of metal, a barrier between his world and whatever lay beneath. He widened the hole, his initial methodical pace now quickened by a sense of profound and unsettling curiosity. As he cleared more earth, the shape began to define itself. It was the corner of a massive reinforced plate with a thick raised edge that suggested a seal. He followed the edge with his shovel, uncovering a perfectly straight line that ran for several feet before turning at a precise 90-degree angle. He was not uncovering a piece of debris. He was tracing the outline of a door, a hatch, a deliberate point of entry into a hidden space, an abandoned place beneath his own field. The scale of the object was immense. He spent the rest of the morning excavating around its perimeter, and by noon he had exposed a square section of steel approximately 4 feet by 4 feet. It was a massive industrial-grade hatch, flush-mounted and constructed with a precision that spoke of military or governmental engineering. Along one edge, a heavy, recessed hinge was visible, frozen solid with rust. In the center, a large wheel-like locking mechanism was barely discernible beneath layers of hardened soil and creeping roots, a formidable seal against the world above. What was most disturbing were the roots. Thick, woody taproots from the prairie grasses and sorghum above had not grown around the object but into it. They had forced their way into the hairline seams of the hatch, weaving themselves into the seal, with a slow, relentless patience, as if nature itself had been trying for decades to both breach and reinforce the lock. These organic tendrils, fused with the corroded steel, created a powerful and unsettling image, a secret so deep that the land had actively grown into it, making it part of itself. As he cleared the last of the mud from one corner of the hatch, His fingers brushed against a set of small stamped markings on the metal frame. He scraped away the grime with his thumbnail, his heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm in his chest. The markings were faint, eroded by time, but still legible. They were not words, but a serial number, a long string of digits and letters, and beneath it, a small, stylized insignia. It was the image of a gear encircling a single perfect atom, a symbol of an age of unseen power and hidden threats. This found object was no farmer's storm shelter. The atomic symbol, stark and unambiguous, belonged to a different world, a world of classified projects, of government secrets, and of a history that was supposed to remain buried. The presence of such a symbol here, in the quiet heart of rural Kansas, was a profound and terrifying contradiction. It suggested that his land, this familiar and seemingly transparent piece of the world, was host to a secret of an entirely different magnitude than he could have ever imagined. The mystery story had just revealed its first chilling clue. The discovery of the hatch and its insignia marked the end of the farmer's solitary investigation. The problem was no longer a matter of damaged soil. It was a matter of a buried, unknown, and potentially dangerous history. The silence of the field now felt charged, watchful. The farmer, a man who had always believed in the evidence of his own senses, now faced a piece of evidence that pointed to a reality far beyond his understanding. The open hole in his field was now a gaping question, and he knew he could not be the one to answer it. The historical record of this event begins not with a photograph or a government report, but with a single humble piece of correspondence now preserved under the cool, stable conditions of the Kansas State Archives. It is a letter, dated June 12, 1964, composed by Arthur Pike and addressed to the Saline County Surveyor's Office. The letter is a model of clarity and sober concern, its prose as neat and methodical as the rows of crops he planted. In it, Pike details the discovery with a farmer's precision, providing the exact location, dimensions, and a careful sketch of the hatch and the atomic insignia he had found. Pike's letter is devoid of speculation or alarm. He does not speak of conspiracies or hidden dangers. Instead, he frames his discovery as a practical problem, a matter of property rights and public record. He asks if the county holds any knowledge of a government easement on his land, or if there are any records of a decommissioned federal installation in that specific section. He is a citizen reporting an anomaly to the proper authorities, a man seeking a rational explanation for a deeply irrational discovery. The letter is a request for information, a humble attempt to reconcile the physical evidence on his farm with the official map of his world. The document is a testament to the character of the man who wrote it. Arthur Pike, as revealed in this single letter, was not a man given to hysteria. He was a landowner, a taxpayer, and a citizen who believed in the orderly function of government and the sanctity of public records. He trusted that the system he was a part of would have an answer for him, that this strange, unsettling object beneath his field would correspond to a file in a cabinet, a line on a map, a known piece of history. His letter is an act of faith in a rational, documented world. This faith, however, would soon be tested. The letter sat within the county bureaucracy for 2 weeks, a period of silence that is itself a part of the historical record. One can imagine it passing from desk to desk, a strange and unwelcome piece of paper that did not fit neatly into any existing category of county business. It was an administrative anomaly, a request that likely generated quiet confusion and perhaps even a degree of institutional unease. How does a county surveyor's office respond to a report of a sealed, subterranean hatch bearing an atomic symbol in the middle of a sorghum field? The official response, when it finally came, was stapled to Pike's original letter, a single sheet of onion skin paper bearing the county's letterhead. It is a memo dated June 26, 1964, and it is a masterpiece of bureaucratic dismissal. In a single terse paragraph, the county surveyor, a man named Miller, summarily dismisses Pike's concerns. The memo states that a review of county records and plat maps shows no evidence of any government installation, past or present, on the Pike property. The object, Miller concludes, is therefore of no official concern to the county. The memo goes on to offer a speculative, almost condescending explanation. It is the opinion of this office, Miller wrote, that the object described is likely the remnant of a pre-war cistern or a privately constructed storm shelter, its materials having been misidentified. The language is deliberately vague and dismissive, designed to close the inquiry permanently. The reinforced steel, the locking mechanism, the precise sketch of the atomic insignia, all of Pike's carefully documented evidence, is ignored, swept aside in favor of a mundane and entirely unsupported rationalization. The case was officially closed. This exchange of letters represents the first and only official acknowledgement of the object's existence. It is a brief, almost invisible flicker in the vast archives of the state, a quiet dialogue between a concerned citizen and an evasive bureaucracy. For the official record, the story ends here. The hatch beneath Arthur Pike's field was declared to be a cistern, a historical footnote not even worthy of that name. It was an act of institutional erasure, a deliberate relabeling of a profound mystery as a mundane piece of rural debris. The archival file containing these two documents is thin, almost weightless, yet it carries the heavy burden of the entire mystery. It is the primary source, the starting point for a forgotten story that refused to remain buried. The stark contrast between the two letters, Pike's meticulous report and Miller's dismissive reply, is the first clue that the truth of what lay beneath the Kansas soil was being actively and officially suppressed. The silence that followed this exchange was not one of resolution but of enforcement. The historical trail goes cold at this point, at least in the official public record. There are no follow-up letters, no internal memos, no further inquiries documented in the county's files. Arthur Pike's discovery was successfully and efficiently neutralized, turned into a non-event by a single paragraph of bureaucratic prose. The hidden story was pushed back underground, its existence denied by the very institution Pike had trusted to explain it. But the hatch itself remained, a silent, steel contradiction to the official narrative. The profound contradiction between Arthur Pike's detailed, evidence-based letter and the county surveyor's dismissive response forms the first major fissure in the official narrative. It is a discrepancy so stark that it cannot be explained by mere incompetence or administrative oversight. Pike, a man with an intimate, lifelong knowledge of his land, described a specific industrial object with a unique and alarming symbol. He was not a man likely to mistake military-grade steel for the concrete of a common cistern. The level of detail in his letter stands as a powerful testament to the reality of what he had found. Surveyor Miller's memo, in contrast, reads as a deliberate act of obfuscation, a document crafted not to clarify but to conceal. By refusing to engage with the specific evidence presented, most notably the atomic insignia, Miller's office was not just answering a question, it was enforcing a narrative. The choice to relabel the object as a cistern was a strategic one, designed to strip the discovery of its alarming and anomalous nature. It was an administrative burial, an attempt to use the weight of official language to crush an inconvenient truth before it could gain traction. This act of institutional denial is made all the more suspicious by its historical context. In 1964, Saline County, Kansas, was not some forgotten backwater. It was on the front lines of the Cold War. The surrounding landscape was dotted with the hardened launch facilities for Atlas F intercontinental ballistic missiles, some of the most powerful and secretive weapons in the nation's arsenal. The local population was well aware of the constant, low-level hum of military activity. The convoys on the highways, the presence of Air Force personnel from the nearby Schilling Air Force Base. In such a charged environment, the discovery of any unrecorded, potentially military installation bearing an atomic symbol should have triggered an immediate and serious investigation. The idea that a county official would casually dismiss such a report is, at best, a sign of profound negligence. At worst, it suggests that the official was acting under instructions, participating either willingly or unwillingly in a pre-existing protocol of silence. The dismissal was not an error. It was a function of a larger, unseen system of information control. The very speed and finality of the surveyor's response are what transform it from a simple administrative document into a piece of evidence in its own right. There is no indication of a site visit, no request for further information or photographs, no consultation with federal authorities. The inquiry was shut down completely, based solely on a review of existing and likely incomplete county maps. This suggests a predetermined outcome, a decision made before the evidence was even considered. The goal was not to investigate, but to terminate the investigation. This initial contradiction is the entry point for the modern-day inquiry, the loose thread that, when pulled, begins to unravel the entire tapestry of silence. It is the moment the shocking story truly begins, not with the discovery of the object itself, but with the first documented lie about it. The official record, which should be a source of clarity, becomes the source of the mystery. The very document that declares the object to be mundane is what proves it is anything but. The contradiction hangs in the archival record, a silent testament to a collision between citizen observation and institutional power. On one side, Arthur Pike and the tangible physical reality of the steel hatch beneath his field. On the other, the official voice of the county, armed with the power to name, to define, and to erase. The gap between these two positions is where the truth of the mystery resides, in the space created by a lie. The historical weight of this moment cannot be overstated. It represents the point at which the secret of the hatch ceased to be a simple physical object and became an active conspiracy of silence. The object was not just lost or forgotten, it was deliberately ignored, its existence officially denied. This denial is a more powerful indicator of its importance than any physical feature of the hatch itself could ever be. Something is only hidden with such care if it is worth hiding. The silence that descends upon the official record after this exchange is profound. The county's dismissal effectively ended the public conversation, but it did not erase the object itself. The hatch remained under the sorghum field, a piece of irrefutable physical evidence that contradicted the official narrative every second of every day. The lie could be written on paper, but it could not change the reality buried in the earth. The unbelievable story had been officially denied, but it had not gone away. The story of the Saline County hatch lay dormant in the archives for nearly 50 years, a forgotten file containing a quiet, unresolved contradiction. It was rediscovered not by a treasure hunter or a conspiracy theorist, but by Dr. Aris Thorne, a historical archivist at the University of Kansas. Thorne was a man in his late 50s with a quiet academic demeanor that concealed a relentless and formidable intellect. His field of expertise was the bureaucratic infrastructure of the Cold War, the paper trails, the procurement forms, the land use surveys, the mundane administrative documents that formed the skeleton of the nation's secret history. Thorne was not a man who searched for spectacular events. He believed that true history was not found in headlines or grand pronouncements, but in the margins, in the footnotes, in the redacted paragraphs of forgotten memos. He was a scholar of institutional language, an expert at detecting the subtle shifts in tone and terminology that betrayed the presence of a hidden truth. He operated on the principle that the most significant stories were often the ones that the official record tried hardest to ignore. He was, in essence, an archaeologist of paperwork. He stumbled upon the Pike correspondence by accident while conducting a broad survey of county land use records from the 1960s for a monograph on agricultural policy during the Cold War. The file was an anomaly, a piece that did not fit the larger puzzle he was assembling. It was the starkness of the contradiction that first caught his professional attention. The farmer's detailed factual letter, followed by the surveyor's hasty, generic dismissal, was a pattern he recognized. It was the signature of a managed truth, a bureaucratic cover-up. His motivation was not born of a desire for fame or adventure, but from a deep, scholarly indignation. The official record had been falsified, a citizen's legitimate inquiry had been stonewalled, and a piece of history had been deliberately obscured. For Thorne, this was an intellectual and ethical offense. His goal was not to expose a grand conspiracy, but simply to correct the record, to restore the truth of what had happened on that small farm in 1964. He was driven by the quiet, stubborn conviction that no part of history should be permanently erased. The other key figure in this narrative, Arthur Pike, exists only as a ghost in the machine, his voice preserved in the formal prose of his letter and the faint, ghostly image of his signature. Through that single document, he is established as the primary witness, a man of credibility and sound mind, whose testimony was unjustly dismissed. The entire investigation hinges on the belief that Pike was telling the truth, that what he saw and documented was real. Thorne's work, in many ways, became an effort to posthumously validate Pike's testimony against the weight of official denial. The investigation, therefore, was not one of physical exploration, but of archival detective work. Thorne began by treating the surveyor's dismissal as the beginning of the mystery, not the end. He started a methodical, cross-referential search, seeking any other document that might corroborate Pike's claim or explain the county's strange reaction. He pulled property tax records, state geological surveys, and declassified federal maps, building a web of interconnected information around the central anomaly of the Pike farm. His first significant breakthrough came from the university's own geography department. In a collection of declassified high-altitude aerial reconnaissance photographs taken by the U.S. Geological Survey, he found an image of Saline County from 1958. Under intense magnification, the Pike farm was visible. And there, in the exact location described in the letter, was a faint but undeniable disturbance in the soil, a geometric discoloration suggesting a large-scale excavation had recently taken place. The hatch had a history that predated its discovery. This discovery was crucial. It proved that the structure was not a pre-war relic, as the surveyor had claimed, but a product of the Cold War itself, constructed sometime in the late 1950s. The photograph was the first piece of independent evidence that supported Pike and directly contradicted the official narrative. It was a silent, monochrome image that screamed with the force of a buried truth finally coming to light. The real story was beginning to emerge from the shadows of the archive. Thorne's next step was to examine maps not just of what was there, but of what was supposed to be there. He accessed declassified Department of Defense maps detailing the locations of the Atlas F missile silos that ringed Salina. The maps were a marvel of precision. Each launch facility, each access road, each support structure meticulously documented. But when he located the coordinates of the Pike farm, he found something even more alarming than the presence of an unlisted structure. He found a blank space. The area was an absence, a void in the data, as if it had been deliberately wiped clean, a secret tunnel of information leading nowhere. Faced with this growing body of anomalous evidence, the letter, the photograph, the blank space on the map, Dr. Thorne's first instinct was not to embrace conspiracy, but to exhaust all possible rational explanations. He was a historian, not a sensationalist, and he understood that the historical record is often messy, incomplete, and filled with mundane errors. He began a systematic process of elimination, testing every plausible, conventional theory that might account for the existence of the hatch without requiring a secret, unacknowledged government project. His first line of inquiry was the one suggested by the county surveyor, a private storm shelter. During the early 1960s, the fear of nuclear war was at its peak, and many families in the Midwest did indeed construct private fallout shelters. Thorne spent weeks sifting through county building permits from the era, searching for any application filed by Arthur Pike or his predecessors. He found none. He also researched the designs of commercially available and government-recommended shelters from the period. None matched the description of a massive 4x4-foot steel hatch with a central locking wheel and an atomic insignia. His next theory was that it might be a forgotten piece of agricultural or industrial infrastructure. He investigated the history of water management in the region, searching for records of large industrial-grade cisterns or irrigation pump housings. He consulted with agricultural historians and retired engineers. Again, the physical description of the hatch did not match any known equipment. The use of thick, reinforced steel and a complex sealing mechanism was far beyond the requirements of any civilian application. The object was over-engineered for any plausible agricultural purpose. He then turned his attention to the possibility of a connection to local industry. Salina had a history of small-scale manufacturing and was located along a major railway line. Thorne hypothesized that the structure might be a buried storage tank or a waste disposal unit from a defunct private company. He cross-referenced environmental records and corporate filings, searching for any company that might have operated on or near the Pike property. The land had been purely agricultural for as long as records existed. There was no industrial history to speak of. Thorne even considered and investigated the possibility of a hoax. Could Arthur Pike have fabricated the story? This seemed the least likely explanation. The man's letter was sober and factual, and the effort required to construct and bury such a massive object would have been immense, far beyond the means of a working farmer, and for no discernible purpose. Furthermore, the 1958 aerial photograph, showing an excavation before Pike's discovery, made the hoax theory untenable. The object was real. It had been there for years. Each failed attempt to find a rational explanation only served to deepen the mystery. Every conventional door he tried to open was locked. The hatch refused to fit into any known category of civilian or agricultural construction. Its features, the scale, the materials, the seal, and above all the insignia, pointed insistently and exclusively in one direction, a clandestine government project. The more he tried to prove it was something ordinary, the more extraordinary it became. The resistance to a simple explanation was not just in the archives, it was in the living memory of the community. Thorne conducted interviews with several elderly residents of Saline County, men and women who had lived through the Cold War. They recalled the constant presence of the Air Force, the tension of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the air raid drills in schools. They were intimately familiar with the visible signs of the secret military world around them. Yet none of them had ever heard a whisper, not even a rumor, of a small unmarked installation on the Pike farm. This collective silence was itself a form of evidence. In a small rural community, secrets are difficult to keep. The construction of a subterranean facility, no matter how clandestine, would have involved trucks, equipment, and personnel. Someone should have seen something. The fact that no one had suggests that the project was carried out with a level of secrecy far exceeding even the already high standards of the known missile silo projects. It was a secret kept not only from the public record, but from the public itself. By systematically dismantling every other possibility, Thorne was left with a single unavoidable conclusion. The object beneath the Pike farm was exactly what it appeared to be, an unacknowledged, officially denied and deeply secret government installation from the height of the Cold War. The absence of a rational explanation was, in itself, the most powerful explanation of all. The abandoned place was not abandoned by accident. It had been deliberately orphaned from history. The shocking discovery was not just that it existed, but that its existence had been so effectively erased. With all conventional explanations exhausted, Dr. Thorne shifted his methodology from eliminating possibilities to actively accumulating corroborating evidence, no matter how circumstantial or disparate. He began to operate like a forensic investigator, piecing together a mosaic of truth from fragmented, seemingly unrelated data points. He sought to build a case so compelling that the institutional silence would become in itself an admission of guilt. His search expanded from local archives to state and federal scientific databases, looking for any trace, any echo the hidden structure might have left behind. His first major success in this new phase came from a surprising source, the state's agricultural soil surveys. He located a retired soil scientist who had worked for the Kansas Department of Agriculture in the mid-1970s. Thorne contacted the man, now in his 80s, and asked if he recalled his work in Saline County. The scientist, after consulting his old field notebooks, recalled the Pike Farm specifically. He remembered it because his soil samples from one particular field had produced anomalous results that he had struggled to explain at the time. The scientist's notes were meticulous. They described soil samples taken from the field in question that showed unusually high localized concentrations of lead, copper, and trace amounts of cobalt. At the time, he had attributed the readings to the possible leaching of old pesticides or the dumping of contaminated farm equipment, common issues in rural areas, but the concentrations were higher than typical for such sources and confined to a strangely regular geographic area. The data had been an unsolved puzzle in his professional life. Thorne overlaid the coordinates from the scientist's notebook onto a map of the Pike Farm. The area of highest metallic concentration corresponded exactly to the location of the sunken scar described in Pike's 1964 letter. This was a crucial link. It was independent scientific data that confirmed the presence of a large non-agricultural metallic object buried beneath the soil, an object that was slowly leaching trace elements into the surrounding environment. The land itself was providing physical evidence of the secret it held. This found object, this body of scientific data, provided a new timeline for the story. The 1958 aerial photograph showed the structure's construction. Pike's 1964 letter documented its discovery. And now the 1970s soil survey documented its ongoing slow decay. The secret was not a static object, but a dynamic presence, a wound in the earth that was continually interacting with its environment. It was a ghost that left behind not spiritual energy, but a verifiable trail of heavy metals. The accumulation of evidence did not stop there. Thorne began to delve into the arcane world of federal procurement contracts from the 1950s, searching for projects with vague, non-specific descriptions assigned to contractors known for classified defense work. He spent months scrolling through microfiche records, cross-referencing project codes with declassified budget reports. It was a search for a needle in a haystack of deliberately obscured information, a hunt for a secret hidden in the endless columns of bureaucratic ledgers. He found a potential match, a 1957 contract awarded to a subsidiary of a major aerospace and defense contractor for the construction of several dozen SC-7 environmental monitoring stations. The project's description was vague, citing geological and atmospheric data collection, and its listed locations were classified. The cost per unit, however, was astronomical, suggesting a level of technology and hardened construction far beyond that of a simple weather station. The atomic insignia, a gear surrounding an atom, was a common motif used by subcontractors for the Atomic Energy Commission, the project's funding agency. While he could not definitively link this contract to the Pike Farm, the pieces fit together with an unsettling precision. The timeline, the likely materials, the government agency, the very name of the project, Environmental Monitoring Station, all resonated with the other fragments of evidence he had collected. He was beginning to see the outline of a vast, secret network of such stations, a hidden infrastructure designed for a purpose that was still terrifyingly unclear. The underground secret on the Pike Farm was likely not unique. It was just the only one that had been accidentally discovered. This convergence of disparate evidence, an old letter, an aerial photograph, a soil report, and a classified contract, created a powerful, multi-layered case. Each piece of evidence on its own could be dismissed as circumstantial or inconclusive, but together they formed a coherent and deeply disturbing narrative. They told the story of a secret that had been so well kept that its existence could only be proven by piecing together its faint, accidental traces, the breadcrumbs it had left behind in the archives of science and bureaucracy. The hidden room beneath the earth was beginning to give up its secrets, not all at once, but piece by painful piece. Armed with this growing portfolio of evidence, Dr. Thorne decided it was time to move the investigation from the private confines of the archive into a more public forum. He believed that the weight of the accumulated data was now sufficient to force a re-examination of the official record. He prepared a meticulous presentation and arranged to deliver it at a meeting of the Saline County Historical Society. He hoped that by presenting the evidence to the community's local historians, he could build grassroots support for a formal inquiry. The presentation took place on a cold autumn evening in the basement of the Salina Public Library. The audience was small, composed mostly of elderly members of the society, amateur historians, and a few younger, curious residents. Thorne laid out his evidence with academic precision. Pike's letter, the surveyor's dismissal, the aerial photograph, the soil analysis, the classified contract. He built his case logically, calmly, presenting the facts without resorting to sensationalism. He concluded by suggesting that the society petition the county for an official archaeological survey of the site. The reaction was not what he had expected. Instead of unified curiosity or scholarly excitement, his presentation cleaved the room in two. A fracture appeared, a deep-seated divide between those who wished to uncover the truth and those who feared the consequences of disturbing it. The older members of the society, men and women who had lived through the anxieties of the Cold War, were visibly uncomfortable. One man, a retired banker and a respected figure in the community, stood up and spoke for many of them. He argued that some things were better left buried. He spoke of the patriotism and the sense of duty that had defined that era, and suggested that if the government had put something there in secret, it was likely for reasons of national security that were still valid. He warned that digging up this old story could attract unwanted attention from federal agencies, stir up old fears, and disrupt the quiet peace of their community. His plea was not for ignorance, but for a willed forgetting, a deliberate choice to let the past remain undisturbed. This position was immediately challenged by a younger history teacher from the local high school. She argued that history could not be a matter of convenience, and that the society had a duty to pursue the truth, regardless of where it led. She spoke of Arthur Pike, of the disservice done to him when his credible report was dismissed. She contended that uncovering the purpose of the secret tunnel was not an act of disrespect to the past, but an act of honoring it by seeking a full and accurate accounting. The room descended into a tense, whispered debate. The fracture was not just social, it was institutional. Thorne had unofficially briefed a county commissioner before the meeting, hoping to gain an ally within the local government. The commissioner, after hearing the evidence, had become evasive and non-committal. After the contentious Historical Society meeting, the commissioner's office ceased returning Thorne's calls. The local government, much like its predecessor in 1964, had chosen a policy of silence and non-engagement. They were building a wall of bureaucratic indifference around the mystery. The story began to leak into the local community, but in a distorted, simplified form. It became a piece of local gossip, a rumor of a hidden bunker or a buried UFO on the old Pike place. The complex, evidence-based narrative Thorne had constructed was being flattened into a kind of modern folklore. The social absorption of the story was another form of burial, a way of rendering the mystery safe and non-threatening by turning it into a familiar, unbelievable tale. This was not the real story, but a comfortable imitation. In the midst of this frustrating stalemate, with official doors closing and the public narrative slipping from his grasp, Thorne received a breakthrough from an unexpected source. An anonymous email appeared in his university inbox. The sender's address was encrypted, and the message contained no text in its body. There was only a subject line, a single sentence that sent a chill down Thorne's spine. My father kept a journal. Below it was a name, Arthur Pike, Jr., and a phone number with an out-of-state area code. This single cryptic message changed everything. It was a voice from the past, a direct link to the primary witness. It suggested the existence of a hidden private record, a document that existed outside the official archives and the distorting lens of public memory. The institutional and social fracture had inadvertently shaken something loose, prompting someone with direct knowledge to step out of the shadows. The wall of silence, it turned out, had a crack in it. The hidden message that changed a forgotten story forever was not on paper, but in a digital inbox. The phone call was one of the most delicate of Dr. Thorne's academic career. He reached Arthur Pike Jr., a man in his early 70s living a quiet life of retirement in another state. At first, the man was guarded, reluctant to speak about a chapter of his family's history that his father had clearly considered a painful and private burden. He remembered the summer of 1964, the storm, his father's quiet obsession with the damaged field, but he knew few details. His father had been a reticent man, not one to share his anxieties. Thorne did not press. He simply explained his research, laid out the evidence he had collected, and spoke of his desire to honor Arthur Pike's original dismissed testimony. He spoke of correcting the historical record, of giving a voice to a man who had been officially silenced. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Arthur Pike Jr. sighed and told Thorne about a small leather-bound journal his father had kept for most of his life, a journal that he had inherited and stored away in a box of old family papers. A week later, a small, carefully wrapped package arrived at Thorne's office. Inside was the journal. It was a standard farmer's ledger, its pages filled with his father's neat, economical script. Most of the entries were mundane, notes on weather, crop prices, equipment repairs. But in the section for June and July of 1964, the tone and subject matter changed dramatically. The journal became a secret parallel record of the events following the county's dismissal of his discovery. It was the hidden story told in the witness's own words. The entries described how Arthur Pike, frustrated and disturbed by the official response, had decided to take matters into his own hands. He wrote of his conviction that the object was not a cistern, that the county was either mistaken or lying. Driven by a need to know the truth, he had returned to the excavation site, not with a shovel, but with a block and tackle winch from his barn. Over the course of a long, grueling afternoon, he had managed to loop a chain through the recessed handle of the locking wheel. The journal described the immense physical effort required to break the seal. The sound of rusted metal groaning under pressure, the screech of the hinge as the hatch for the first time in years moved a few inches. He hadn't been able to open it fully, but he had created a gap large enough to peer into with a flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the top rungs of a narrow steel ladder descending into a perfectly black, silent void. The air that escaped from the opening was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of ozone and old metal. This was a stunning revelation. The secret tunnel was real, and the primary witness had breached it, but what followed in the journal was even more chilling. Pike described how he had angled his flashlight beam to illuminate the interior wall of the shaft, directly opposite the ladder. There, scrawled in a thick white grease pencil, were words. They were not a label or a technical designation, but a stark, urgent warning, written in hurried block letters. The journal entry for that day transcribed the words he had seen. Entry forbidden by order. Protocol 7. Active. Observe and report only. Do not breach. The language was military in its clipped, authoritative tone. It was a message intended not for the public, but for a specific authorized person who knew what Protocol 7 was. It was an internal communication, a standing order left behind in a sealed, forgotten place. The hatch was not just an entrance, it was a guarded boundary. The discovery of the journal and the revelation of the warning message marked the first major turning point in the investigation. It was the moment the mystery transitioned from a historical inquiry into something far more immediate and menacing. The evidence was no longer just about a physical object. It was about an active protocol, a set of instructions for a situation that remained terrifyingly undefined. The words "observe and report only" suggested that the chamber was not inert, but was or had been monitoring something. The final journal entry on the subject was dated the following day. Pike wrote that he had returned at dawn and forced the hatch closed again, packing soil and rock into the seam to reseal it as best he could. he wrote of a profound and chilling realization. The warnings were not to keep people out for their own safety, but to prevent them from interfering with a process. He concluded the entry with a single haunting sentence: "I will not speak of this again. I have sealed it as it was meant to be sealed." The journal provided the shocking truth behind the old mansion story no one told, or in this case, the story of a hole in a field. The farmer, after seeing the truth, had become its new silent guardian. The discovery of Arthur Pike's journal, with its first-hand account of the interior warnings and the mysterious Protocol 7, provided Dr. Thorne with a new and powerful piece of evidence. He now had a specific term, a piece of official jargon, that he could use to pry open the closed doors of the federal bureaucracy. He drafted and submitted a new set of requests under the Freedom of Information Act, this time addressed directly to the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy, the successor to the Atomic Energy Commission. His request was highly specific. He cited the geographic coordinates of the Pike farm, the approximate date of construction based on the aerial photograph, and the exact phrase Protocol 7 as it related to any SC-7 environmental monitoring stations or similar clandestine projects from that era. By using their own internal language, he hoped to bypass the low-level denials and force a genuine search of classified archives. He was no longer asking if something was there. He was demonstrating that he already knew and was asking what it was. The response from the federal government was a profound and unnerving silence. The standard deadlines for a FOIA response came and went. His follow-up inquiries were met with polite formulaic emails stating that his request was under review. Months passed. The silence was not the silence of neglect. It felt strategic, deliberate. It was the sound of a large, complex machine grinding slowly, deciding how to handle a problem that had unexpectedly resurfaced after half a century. The bureaucracy was not ignoring him, it was studying him. Then, after nearly 6 months of this official silence, a different kind of response arrived. It was not a letter to Thorne, but a physical action at the site itself. A local newspaper in Salina ran a small back-page article about a team from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers arriving at a farm in the county to conduct a routine soil and water table survey. The article mentioned that the area would be cordoned off for 48 hours for public safety. The farm was the old Pike property, now owned by a large agricultural corporation that had readily granted the government access. Thorne knew immediately what was happening. This was not a survey, it was an intervention. The government, alerted by his specific FOIA request, was moving to neutralize the source of the problem permanently. They were not answering his question, they were erasing the subject of the question. He tried to get access to the site, but was politely and firmly turned away by a uniformed officer at a temporary checkpoint, who cited the ongoing environmental survey. The wall of official power had become a physical barrier. The true nature of the operation was revealed not on the ground, but from space. A colleague of Thorne's at the university had access to commercial satellite imaging services. At Thorne's urgent request, he tasked a satellite to capture high-resolution images of the Pike farm during the 48-hour window of the Corps' activity. The images that came back were stunning and unambiguous. They showed a large-scale excavation centered on the exact location of the hatch. Heavy machinery, trucks, and a concrete mixer were visible on the site. The subsequent images, taken just before the Corps departed, showed the hole being filled. But they were not just replacing the soil. The satellite captured the unmistakable image of a concrete pumper truck with its boom extended over the excavation. They were not removing the secret tunnel or its contents. They were entombing it, filling the subterranean chamber and its access shaft with tons of reinforced concrete, creating a permanent, impenetrable seal far more formidable than the original hatch. They were burying the secret under a tomb of their own making. This act was the most powerful confirmation Thorne could have ever received. It was a tacit admission of guilt on a massive scale. An agency does not deploy a team of engineers and tons of concrete to deal with a pre-war cistern. This was a deliberate, expensive, and modern-day cover-up, an act of historical suppression carried out with military efficiency. The government had responded to his inquiry not with a document, but with a physical act of erasure, a final, definitive silencing of the site. The obstruction was now absolute. The primary piece of evidence, the hatch itself, was gone, buried forever beneath a man-made mountain of concrete. Any hope of a future archaeological survey, of physically entering the chamber and learning its secrets, was extinguished. The government had effectively slammed the door on the mystery and welded it shut. Thorne was left with his collection of old documents and a set of satellite photographs documenting a crime against history. The silence that followed this event was different. It was no longer a passive absence of information, but an active, enforced silence. The federal agencies had demonstrated that they were willing to take decisive and expensive action to protect this particular secret. The message to Thorne was clear, though unspoken: do not push this any further. The forgotten story was not just forgotten. It was being actively held down, suppressed by the full weight of the state. The real story of the abandoned hospital with a hidden basement had nothing on this quiet, efficient erasure. Dr. Thorne felt a profound sense of defeat. The physical entombment of the site was a final, brutal checkmate. His investigation had hit a literal concrete wall. He had a compelling collection of circumstantial evidence, but the central artifact, the source of the entire mystery, was now beyond reach, likely forever. He documented the Army Corps of Engineers' intervention, added the satellite photos to his file, and prepared to write a frustratingly incomplete paper on his findings. The story, it seemed, would end with a question mark. It was in this moment of professional despair that the telephone rang in his office. It was Arthur Pike Jr. again. He sounded agitated. He told Thorne that their previous conversations had prompted him to finally go through all of his father's old possessions, which had been stored in boxes in his attic for decades. He was looking for any other letters or documents, but instead he had found an object. An object his father had never mentioned, but which he now realized must be connected to the events of 1964. Pike Jr. described a small, heavy object, wrapped in a thick, oil-stained canvas cloth, tied shut with twine. It had been at the bottom of his father's old wooden tool chest, a place he hadn't looked in over 30 years. He said his father had been a meticulous man who kept his tools clean and organized. This strange, wrapped parcel was completely out of place. He had unwrapped it, and he couldn't make sense of what he had found. He wanted to send it to Thorne. A few days later, another package arrived, this one heavier than the last. Inside, nestled in bubble wrap, was the object. It was a metal cylinder, approximately 12 inches long and 4 inches in diameter, made of what appeared to be stainless steel. It was capped at both ends with heavy welded seals, and along one side a small glass-covered portal, like a porthole, was set into the metal, revealing only darkness within. The object was cold, dense, and exuded an aura of precise, serious engineering. It was a self-contained, hermetically sealed capsule. Thorne immediately turned to Arthur Pike's journal, rereading the entries from 1964 with a new focus. He found what he was looking for in a passage he had previously overlooked. After describing the warnings on the wall, Pike had briefly mentioned a small cluttered shelf just inside the opening. On it were a few abandoned tools and a metal tube. In his haste and fear, he had grabbed the tube, thinking it might be a specialized tool for the hatch, before retreating and sealing the entrance. He had never returned it. This was an astonishing breakthrough. Arthur Pike, in his one and only brief intrusion into the hidden chamber, had inadvertently removed a single crucial piece of its contents. The government, in its methodical erasure of the site, had missed something. They had entombed the chamber, but they did not know that a piece of it had escaped decades earlier. A silent witness that had been hiding in plain sight in a farmer's tool chest. This found object was the ghost that had slipped through the concrete tomb. The capsule was a tangible link to the buried secret, a physical piece of evidence that could not be denied or explained away. Thorne examined it for hours under a magnifying lamp in his university lab. The craftsmanship was military grade. The seals were perfect. It was designed to protect its contents from the outside world, or perhaps to protect the outside world from its contents. It was a container, a vessel, and its purpose was a complete mystery. The creepy story of the locked room and the secret buried inside had just yielded the key. Then he saw it. Glued to the side of the cylinder, partially protected from the decades of storage by a slight recess in the metal, was a small rectangular paper label. It was yellowed and brittle with age. The ink faded almost to invisibility. Most of the text, which appeared to have been printed by a typewriter, was an illegible smudge. But 3 words, printed in a slightly larger, bolder font at the top of the label, were still faintly, miraculously readable. The words were bioassay sample. The discovery of this label sent a fresh wave of chills through Thorne. Bioassay, a term for the scientific measurement of the concentration or potency of a substance by its effect on living cells or tissues. The sterile, sealed chamber was not just a monitoring station, it was a laboratory of some kind. And this capsule was designed to hold a biological sample. The implications were staggering and terrifying. The nature of the secret had just shifted from a matter of hidden structures to one of hidden biology. The discovery of the bioassay capsule and its chilling label forced Dr. Thorne to re-evaluate the entirety of his research through a new, much darker lens. He returned once again to Arthur Pike's journal, but this time he was not looking for clues about the structure. He was searching for evidence of its psychological impact. He read past the entries of the discovery and into the weeks and months that followed, into the quiet, mundane record of a farmer's life. And there he found it, a slow, subtle, but undeniable record of a man's quiet unraveling. The journal entries in the autumn and winter of 1964 show a marked change in Arthur Pike's state of mind. His notes on crop yields and weather patterns are interspersed with observations of a different nature. He writes of a persistent feeling of being watched, a sense that the familiar open sky of Kansas now held a hidden, observant presence. He describes stopping his tractor in the middle of the field, the silence of the plains suddenly feeling not peaceful, but heavy, laden with the weight of the secret he carried alone. Pike's prose, once so grounded and practical, becomes tinged with a quiet, fatalistic paranoia. He mentions seeing strange high-altitude aircraft that flew without lights and hearing faint, low-frequency hums that seemed to emanate from the ground at night. He acknowledges that these could be tricks of the mind, the product of his own anxiety, but the entries return to them again and again. The knowledge of what he had found and the official institutional denial of its existence had severed his connection to the world he knew. It had isolated him, turning his own home into a place of profound unease. The land itself, once a source of sustenance and stability, became a source of dread. He writes in one entry of being unable to walk over the section of the field where the hatch was buried, a physical revulsion preventing him from doing so. The silence of his own property had become a conscious entity, a quiet conspirator in the secret it kept. This was the record of a man haunted not by a ghost, but by a piece of suppressed truth, a truth so large and terrifying that it had poisoned his perception of reality. This psychological breakdown was not explosive or dramatic. It was a slow, quiet erosion of certainty, a creeping dread that settled deep into the man's soul. The government's lie had not just closed an inquiry, it had gaslighted a citizen, forcing him to question his own senses. By denying the reality of what he had seen, they had forced the entire massive weight of the secret inward, making it a burden he had to carry in complete and total isolation. The journal was the only place he could unburden himself. This personal psychological record provides the human cost of the institutional secrecy. The story ceases to be a simple tale of a mysterious discovery and becomes a narrative about the devastating impact of state-sponsored lies on the individual psyche. Arthur Pike's experience demonstrates that the act of burying a secret is not a passive event. It is an act of violence, one that inflicts real and lasting harm on those who come into contact with the truth. Thorne saw a parallel between Pike's quiet breakdown and the collective breakdown of the community's memory of the event. The story, as it spread through local gossip, had been stripped of its terrifying specifics and turned into a safe, generic ghost story. The community, much like Pike, had found a way to cope with a disturbing truth by rendering it into something unbelievable, something that did not need to be seriously confronted. Both the individual and the collective had chosen a form of managed insanity over an unbearable reality. The journal contains one final, deeply cryptic entry that speaks to this psychological collapse. It is dated several years later, in the late 1960s, and appears to be one of the last times Pike ever wrote about the incident. The entry is short, just 2 sentences, but it reveals the terrifying conclusion his isolated mind had reached after years of silent contemplation of the warnings he had seen and the nature of the thing he had found. He wrote, "I used to think the warnings were for us to keep us out. I know now they were for them in case it ever got out." This single, horrifying reinterpretation of the evidence, this shift in perspective, reveals the depth of his psychological terror. The creepy story had found its emotional core. It was not a story about a hidden room, but about a cage, and for Arthur Pike, the world outside the cage had begun to feel terrifyingly fragile. The bioassay capsule was the final, irrefutable piece of the puzzle, the one artifact that had escaped the institutional purge. Dr. Thorne knew that its analysis was the key to understanding the true purpose of the entire installation. However, he also knew that he could not submit it for any official analysis. To do so would be to surrender the only piece of leverage he had to the very agencies that had orchestrated the cover-up. The capsule would simply disappear into a classified lab, and he would never learn its secrets. He needed a way to analyze its contents, or at least its labeling, without breaching the seals, without altering the object in any way. He turned to a trusted colleague in the university's physics department, a man with expertise in non-invasive imaging and materials analysis. He presented the capsule not as a potential bioweapon or a government secret, but as a historical artifact of unknown origin, and asked if there were any methods to read the faded illegible text on the paper label without touching it. The physicist was intrigued by the technical challenge. He took the capsule to his lab, a room filled with the quiet hum of advanced scientific equipment. He first attempted high-resolution digital photography under various light spectra, which yielded slightly better but still inconclusive results. He then decided to use a technique called multispectral imaging, a process that exposes an object to narrow bands of light across the electromagnetic spectrum, including ultraviolet and infrared, to reveal details invisible to the human eye. The process was slow and methodical. The capsule was placed in a secure chamber, and for hours the physicist bombarded the faded label with different wavelengths of light, the results captured by a sensitive digital sensor and fed into a computer. The computer then layered the different images, algorithmically enhancing the faint traces of ink that had been absorbed into the paper fibers decades earlier. Slowly, painstakingly, a ghostly image of the original text began to emerge on the monitor. Thorne stood beside the physicist, watching in silence as the faded letters resolved into clear, legible words. The full text of the label, preserved by science, materialized before their eyes. It was a technical description, a set of instructions, and it was more horrifying than anything Thorne could have ever imagined. The label was not just a name, it was a protocol for the end of the world. The full label read, Unit SC7, Bioassay Sample, Post-Event. Atmospheric and soil particulate. Do not retrieve until 72 hours post-zero. Handle according to Protocol 7. Each word, each phrase, landed with the force of a physical blow. The mystery was solved. The structure was not a command bunker, not a shelter, not a weapons silo. It was a cold, automated scientific instrument, a tombstone designed to collect data from a dead world. The term post-event and post-zero were unambiguous Cold War jargon for the period immediately following a full-scale nuclear exchange. The installation's sole purpose was to activate after the bombs had fallen. It was designed to automatically collect samples of the radioactive, biologically contaminated air and soil of a post-nuclear landscape, seal them in capsules like the one Thorne now possessed, and wait for a retrieval that might never come. It was a data collection device for Armageddon. This was the irrefutable, horrifying discovery. Protocol 7 was not a warning to keep people out. It was the set of instructions for handling the lethal radioactive samples the station was designed to collect. The facility was never meant to protect human life. It was a machine built to write the autopsy report for human civilization. Its existence was predicated on a chillingly detached scientific faith that even if humanity perished, its data must be preserved. The shocking discovery was not of a weapon, but of the cold, bureaucratic logic of extinction. The emotional weight of this revelation was immense. It recontextualized everything: the secrecy, the warnings, Arthur Pike's creeping dread. He had been living for years on top of a machine designed to operate in his absence, in the absence of everyone. The silence of the Kansas plains was not just the silence of a rural landscape, it was a rehearsal for the final silence that the machine was built to record. The true story was colder and more inhuman than any tale of conspiracy or malice. It was a story of a system preparing with calm scientific rigor for its own demise. The revelation of the installation's true purpose left Dr. Thorne in a state of quiet, intellectual shock. The truth was colder, more profound, and more philosophically disturbing than any scenario he had previously considered. He now understood the immense secrecy surrounding the project. Public knowledge of a government program that was not designed to prevent nuclear war, but to scientifically document its aftermath, would have been politically and psychologically devastating during the Cold War. It was a program that tacitly accepted the possibility of total extinction. He knew he had to publish his findings. The story of Arthur Pike, of the institutional cover-up, and of the chilling purpose of the SC-7 stations was a piece of history that needed to be told. He spent the next several months compiling all of his research into a single, comprehensive academic paper. He documented every step of his investigation, from the initial discovery of the archival letter to the multispectral analysis of the capsule's label. He laid out the evidence dispassionately, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. He submitted the paper, titled Protocol 7, An Archaeology of a Cold War Secret, to a prestigious historical journal. He knew the peer review process would be rigorous, but he was confident in the strength of his evidence. He had the letters, the journal, the photographs, the scientific data, and the physical artifact of the capsule itself. His case was, he believed, irrefutable. He had at last corrected the historical record and given voice to the truth that Arthur Pike had been forced to bury. About a month after he submitted the paper, before he had even received a response from the journal's editors, he received a phone call. The caller was a woman with a calm, professional voice who identified herself as being from the Department of Energy's Office of Legacy Management. She said she had been made aware of his research and would like to meet with him to discuss it. She suggested they meet on neutral ground in a quiet conference room at the university library. Thorne, though wary, agreed. Two people arrived for the meeting, a man and a woman in plain business suits. They were polite, professional, and exuded an air of quiet, unassailable authority. They did not threaten him or attempt to intimidate him. They did not deny his findings. In fact, they quietly confirmed them, referring to the installation as a long-decommissioned atmospheric survey station that had been part of a redundant environmental monitoring network. They used the calm, sterile language of bureaucracy to strip the story of its horror. Then came the purpose of their visit. They did not ask him to retract his paper. They simply explained that the program had been officially declassified in a technical sense, but that a public revelation of its details could cause unnecessary public anxiety and misrepresent the defensive nature of Cold War strategic planning. They then informed him that the Department of Energy was prepared to offer the university's history department a substantial multi-year grant to fund the digitization of its Cold War archives. The grant was not explicitly tied to his paper, but the implication was crystal clear. It was a brilliant, insidious strategy. It was not a threat. It was an act of institutional absorption. They were not silencing him with force, but with generosity. By providing a large grant, they were making the university an interested party in the matter, creating institutional pressure on Thorne to be a team player. They were using the levers of funding and professional courtesy to manage the narrative, to ensure that his shocking story would be released not as an explosive revelation, a headline, but as a quiet, academic footnote. Thorne understood the game perfectly. He did not accept or decline the offer, which was never explicitly made. The meeting ended with polite handshakes. A few weeks later, the university's dean contacted him to inform him of the wonderful news about a new DOE grant. The dean also suggested that Thorne might want to reframe some of the more speculative conclusions in his paper before publication to ensure it met the highest standards of academic sobriety. The institutional machine had quietly and effectively surrounded him. The immediate aftermath of the irrefutable discovery was not a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet, bureaucratic co-opting of the truth. The story would come out, but it would be managed. The government's strategy was not to deny the truth any longer, but to control the context in which it was told, to bleed it of its emotional and political power. The ranger who found a hidden room in an abandoned place had at least faced a physical threat. Thorne faced something far more subtle and perhaps more effective, a quiet, well-funded, and professionally polite act of historical neutralization. Dr. Thorne's paper was eventually published nearly a year after he first submitted it. As the university dean had suggested, its final version was subtly but significantly altered. The most direct and accusatory language regarding the cover-up was softened, and the paper was framed more as an academic case study in archival research than as an exposé of a terrifying secret program. The horrifying truth was there, embedded in the evidence he presented, but its fangs had been professionally filed down. The paper was published, but it did not make a splash. It made a quiet, scholarly ripple. Over the years, Thorne's article became a niche piece of Cold War historiography, a fascinating but obscure footnote in the grand narrative of the atomic age. It was occasionally cited in other academic works on government secrecy or nuclear-era paranoia, its explosive core of evidence treated as just another data point in a larger, more abstract historical debate. The institutional management of the story had been a complete success. The truth was not hidden. It was simply rendered academic, sterile, and ultimately harmless. In Saline County, the story of the hatch on the Pike farm met a different, but equally effective, fate. It was absorbed into the local folklore, its sharp factual edges worn smooth by years of retelling. The story became a vague and malleable legend, told around campfires or by teenagers looking for a thrill. It was a tale of a secret government bunker, a buried UFO, or sometimes a fisherman's shocking discovery buried in a forgotten container that had somehow migrated inland. The specific, terrifying details, the protocol, the warnings, the bioassay capsule, were lost, replaced by the generic, comfortable tropes of a local ghost story. The process of historical erosion was relentless. The Pike farm was eventually sold to an agricultural conglomerate, and the family farmhouse was torn down. The land was integrated into a vast, anonymous landscape of industrial agriculture, tilled by massive, automated machines guided by GPS, their operators working from remote offices hundreds of miles away. The human connection to the land, the intimate knowledge that had allowed Arthur Pike to notice the anomaly in the first place, was gone. The land had no more secrets to give, for there was no one left to listen. The physical evidence, too, was reburied under new layers of forgetting. The concrete plug the Army Corps of Engineers had installed was deep beneath the topsoil, its existence unknown to the new owners, and the single crucial artifact that had escaped, the stainless steel capsule, suffered its own quiet, bureaucratic burial. After Thorne's retirement from the university, the capsule was transferred from the physics department's lab to the university's central archives for permanent storage. There, in the hands of a new generation of archivists with no knowledge of its specific history, it was given a new, anonymous identity. Its file was lost, its connection to the Thorne paper severed by a simple clerical error. The object itself was tagged with a generic label and placed in a drawer, surrounded by other geological and archaeological curiosities. Its final official designation, as recorded in the university's digital catalogue, was Geological Core Sample, Saline County, C. 1950. The documented legacy of the SC7 station was, therefore, a story of successful neutralization on all fronts. Its academic history was contained, its local history was mythologized, its physical site was entombed, and its last remaining artifact was misidentified and lost within the very archival system that Thorne had used to uncover it. The entire terrifying truth had been hidden again, this time not under soil and steel, but under layers of academic jargon, folklore, and bureaucratic incompetence. The silence that had been broken by the storm in 1964 had been restored, not by force, but by the slow, inexorable processes of time and institutional forgetting. The story had been told, but it had not been heard. It had been documented, but it had not been remembered. The weight of the secret had been lifted from the historical record and allowed to dissipate into the ether of myth and obscure scholarship. The untold mystery story of the farmer who found a hidden tunnel was, once again, untold. And yet, the physical reality of the thing itself remained. The entombed structure, the mislabeled capsule, they were still there, silent and inert. The truth had not been destroyed, only deeply, profoundly, and perhaps permanently reinterred. History had been made safe, but it had not been made whole. The scar on the land was gone from sight, but the wound remained, a quiet, festering secret in the heart of the country. Today, the field in Saline County where Arthur Pike once grew sorghum is indistinguishable from the thousands of square miles of agricultural land that surround it. It is a vast, flat expanse of genetically modified crops, its surface sculpted by the precise, unthinking geometry of industrial farming. There are no visible scars, no markers, no hint of the profound and terrifying secret that lies dormant deep beneath the rich topsoil. The land is a placid, productive surface, its history rendered invisible, its silence seemingly absolute. The concrete plug, poured by the Army Corps of Engineers decades ago, remains where they left it. It is a massive, permanent tombstone for a secret that was never officially born. It has become a part of the deep geology of the place, a man-made geological intrusion that will likely outlast the civilization that created it. The structure it encases is slowly, inevitably, succumbing to the pressures of the earth, its metal decaying, its purpose unfulfilled, a cold and forgotten monument to a future that never happened. The story, as a coherent narrative, has ceased to exist in any public or institutional memory. Dr. Aris Thorne passed away several years after his retirement, his groundbreaking paper, a minor entry in a long list of academic publications. Arthur Pike Jr. is also gone, and with him the last living first-hand link to the journal that broke the case open. The story has been orphaned from its witnesses, its investigators and its artifacts. It survives only as a collection of scattered, disconnected documents in archives that have forgotten their significance. And yet the secret refuses to be entirely erased. It leaves behind a single, persistent, and technologically verifiable ghost. On cold, clear winter nights, when the temperature of the land drops below freezing, military and geological survey satellites pass high overhead. Some of these satellites are equipped with sensitive thermal imaging cameras, capable of detecting minute variations in the surface temperature of the Earth. And at the exact coordinates of the old Pike farm, they occasionally register a faint recurring anomaly. It is a cold spot, a geometrically perfect rectangle that is consistently a few degrees colder than the surrounding Earth. The massive concrete plug and the hollow entombed chamber beneath it act as a heat sink, creating a thermal void, a subtle but measurable signature that resists all climatological and geological explanation. It is the final faint echo of the buried structure, a ghost visible only in the invisible spectrum of infrared light. The land, it seems, cannot entirely forget. This thermal anomaly is the story's fatalistic epilogue. It is a confirmation that the physical reality of the secret endures, even after its history has been suppressed and forgotten. The structure remains, a silent, unblinking eye buried in the heart of the continent, its presence betrayed only by the cold it exudes. The evidence is still there, recorded in the detached digital language of satellite data, but there is no one left to interpret it, no one left to ask what it means. The silence that hangs over the Kansas plains is therefore not a silence of peace or emptiness. It is the heavy, layered silence of a history that has been successfully and ruthlessly suppressed. It is the silence of a truth that has been entombed, of a story that has been told but not heard, of a witness that can no longer speak. The mystery has not been solved, it has merely been contained. The weight of what lies beneath the soil is still there, a permanent cold spot in the memory of the land. The story of the SC7 station is a testament to the power of institutions to manage and erase inconvenient truths, but it is also a testament to the persistence of evidence. The secrets that men bury in the earth have a way of leaving traces, of leaking into the record, of scarring the land in ways that can never be fully healed. The earth does not forget, even when we are forced to. The final, chilling truth is that the story is not over. It is simply waiting in the cold and the dark for the next storm. If you want to uncover more mysteries like this one, subscribe to the channel and never miss the real stories that history tried to bury. Leave a comment with where you're watching from, and share this story so the truth is never forgotten.